Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, you all wanted it, so we're going to be talking about the newest album from Shawn Mendes called Illuminate. Oh boy, I have not been looking forward to this. Hell, anybody who's been watching Billboard Breakdown over the past few weeks, or my very last review before this, you already know that. But for everyone else, let's skip back a year to 2015 to chart out how we got to this point. Because believe it or not, when I covered Shawn Mendes' debut album Handwritten last year, I was going in with some real expectations, or at the very least a hope that Shawn Mendes could rise above his Vine star origins to flesh out, some actual songs. Now, for the most part, that didn't really happen, which is why Handwritten fell just below a pass for me, as he tried emulating Justin Timberlake by way of Ed Sheeran that lacked the interesting production or witty writing to really get there for me. But still, a part of me wanted to root for this kid, and I still hold that Something Big is a damn great song that I like to this day. But man, ever since then, my opinion on Shawn Mendes has been plummeting, as more singles have exposed flaws and issues that I really hoped he'd be able to avoid. His writing is slipping perilously closer to the self-aggrandizing douchebaggery that's symptomatic of the white guy with acoustic guitar moniker, and the increasingly sterile production and delivery was not helping. And from what I heard going into Illuminate, well, suffice to say, I was gearing up for a real disaster, even though I did still have some hope deep down that this fellow Canadian might be able to pull something together on this sophomore project. So okay, what happened? Well, nothing good, that's for damn sure. Let's get this out of the way right now. Illuminate by Shawn Mendes sucks. A lot. Most certainly a sophomore slump for this guy. It's the sort of bad album that I find absolutely infuriating. The sort of gutless, sterile pablum that seems weaponized by his handlers and co-writers to hit his target demographic, and yet for a certain portion of the album, they can't even get that right. Now, let's say what you will about One Direction. They made some shameless pandering nonsense, but Shawn Mendes' brand of it is much more insufferable for me. Most because it's trying to present itself as really thoughtful and heartfelt instead of the brazen, insincere ripoff of Ed Sheeran that it really is. And to explain all that, we need to talk about the big underlying reason why this album doesn't work at all that stretches across every element of the album: the framing. Now, on the surface, it's a concept that's pretty basic, but really framing doesn't get enough conversation and discussion because it's often much easier to focus on what was said than how it was said. And while there are plenty of problems with the what on this album, especially in the writing, believe me, we'll get to it, the main underlying issue, most often Shawn Mendes himself, is not that he isn't sincere about what he's singing. I don't doubt he believes everything he wrote and performed on this album, but that sincerity can be really badly misplaced next to some of the subject matter, or can come across a lot uglier than it should be, a lot more revealing. Or at the very least, it's inflated to proportions that don't remotely match the stakes of the songs. Now, normally you can excuse that last one. He's young, there's a lot of big emotions on this album, but bombast needs to be backed up by a performer who can match it, and Shawn Mendes often can't. Forget his annoyingly thin falsetto or how his attempts to present raw emotion sounds like he's got a bad head cold. My issue is that soulful warble he does just has no gravitas or swell to it, even with the backing choir trying desperately to lend it some strength. That better than he can at the end of Treat You Better is perhaps the worst example. He just sounds really pissy on there. Furthermore, there's no sense of subtlety to these songs, which only serves to further emphasize how limited his dramatic range really is, and how flat many of these songs come off to me. And that's a big problem that really comes through in the writing, and there's no way around it. The lyrics on this album piss me off. At its best, it's just kind of sloppy. Mercy is probably the best song on this album, and even then it's got the gem of how he'll sacrifice his life twice, which I'm fairly certain is physically impossible, and just rings as a less interesting version of what Bruno Mars did on Grenade. Or take No Promises, a song about the one-night stand with one of the lazier hooks that he's got here, as he asks for no promises because we won't keep our promises. Sloppy rhyming aside, it shows an unwillingness to take any responsibility that runs through this album and really gets on my nerves. Three Empty Words, prime example of that. The relationship kind of stalled out, they can't even muster the will to fight about it anymore, and yet instead of just ending it, Shawn Mendes is just going to stop saying I love you because anything more might actually hurt. Dude, you'd probably be doing both of you a favor. Sometimes relationships don't work out, you can still be friends, just have some testicles and actually end it already. Of course, then you have the actual breakup songs on this album like Don't Be a Fool and Honest, which are some of the most insincere exercises in cliched emotional manipulation that I've heard in a while. In the former case, he tells the girl, don't be a fool and hold on to affection. She'll find another man someday because that's what she wants to hear. And yet within the track, he tells her to kiss him and says that he really does hope that he likes her and he wishes that he could be there for her, but it needs to end now for the best. How shameless are you, Shawn Mendes? And Honest somehow is even worse, where against a bizarrely chipper melody he says it's not her fault, he'll probably regret it, but she deserves better, and should just move on. You know, being honest doesn't mean you're not being an asshole here, dude. And what's truly weird is when you place it opposite a song where he supposedly is falling in love on Like This, it's played as melancholic and torturous as he supposedly can't get enough of her honesty. Even though in that song, he preemptively negs the girl by saying she's not even drop dead gorgeous. And this is where I have a hard time determining whether or not the level of incompetence, whether or not the writing is just lazy, which it is. You'll be hard pressed to find much detail or symbolism on this album if you find it at all. But there's just a fundamental misunderstanding of how relationships actually work. But even stepping outside of that, the level of self-absorbed douchebaggery that bleeds through the writing is inescapable. The opening track Ruin has him pining for an ex, and even though he's not trying to ruin her happiness, he also wants her to know that he's the only one for you, as if that's not causing a problem here. And that presumptive nature definitely comes through and treats you better. Where even despite the girl saying she loves her current boyfriend, Shawn Mendes tells her he's not right for you, that she should stop wasting time on all your wasted crying when she could be with him instead. And then there's Bad Reputation, which despite a healthy dose of slut-shaming by proxy, Shawn Mendes assures this girl that nobody really understands what she's been through but him, but of course he'd like to see what's underneath anyway. Wow! Talk about the definition of the ugly white knighting stereotype. Disgusting. Or take Patience, where he doesn't like that this older girl doesn't really want to hook up with him or any sort of long-term relationship or make it serious. But, you know, instead of making a stand and mend a potentially bad situation, he keeps on making the same mistakes even as he loses patience with her. Why does all this writing stink of insincerity or laziness when he won't actually take a stand and do something for himself if he's got a problem with it? Because then we hit the tipping point on Understand, where he wonders if he's changing, but midway through the spoken word monologue, midway through this track, which I immediately turned off the first couple times I heard, he assures us that as long as he stays true to himself, it's all okay if he changes. People thought Mick Jenkins' debut was condescending, trite, and self-serving. Really, it wasn't, but this is so much worse. And you know, so much of this could be possibly excused if the instrumentation and production added some texture or color to these songs, but instead we get production analogous to James Bay by way of Charlie Puth. The bass lines are completely formless, the guitars occasionally pick up a bit of texture like on the warmer acoustics of Like This, or the slightly lo-fi pickup of Patience or the rougher pickup on Honest, for the most part just liquid and tepid, and nearly always the heavier percussion is layered on top instead of actually supporting the melody. You occasionally get some stabs at more vintage soul like on some of the pianos that fall hilariously flat. Say nothing of the outright rip-off of the main melody line of Don't Be a Fool from Tennessee Whiskey, last covered by Chris Stapleton, who actually has far more soul than Shawn Mendes could even aspire to. But overall, the larger problem is how clean and utterly flat so much of the production feels. At least John Mayer, for as much as I despise that guy, would let his guitars pick up some warmth here, whereas so much of this record either tries for grooves it can't sustain or melodies too painfully basic to be remotely memorable. This is before you get the hilarious sex song Lights Out, which given its hilariously chipper presentation with the acoustic guitar and the piano, I can't remotely take it seriously. It's the furthest thing from sexy, and yet outside of that, there's no humor and barely any levity to this album, which implies that most of these tracks are supposed to be taken seriously or framed as romantic, when in reality, they don't even come close. So to conclude here, this is an album that shows Shawn Mendes growing up to be the insufferable and pretentious white guy with acoustic guitar archetype that we've all come to know and despise pretty much, with music that is as underwritten, shallow, and alternatively tedious and infuriating as we get. This is not an album written because of an artistic impulse to tell more of a story, or even just to pick up chicks. It is committee-driven slurry, as pumped up to a teenage audience that really, they do deserve a lot better. And if this album is intending to illuminate anything, is that I was kind of wrong in giving this kid any credit to start off with. Sure, be yourself, but take a lesson from The Weeknd or even Ed Sheeran and at least own it when you're being a lazy, entitled dick piston. It's a 3 out of 10. No way in hell I'm recommending this, especially not to his fans. And hopefully, he'll end up back on Vine with Nash Greer and the rest of the trash like that, or we can ignore him in peace. Skip this. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe. I've been more than grateful. I got the poll up here, so all of you who inevitably disagree with me, there's your chance to prove it. But still, guys, you deserve so much better than this. At the very least, go with Ed Sheeran. He's at least got some talent. He writes some interesting songs. This is garbage. But beyond that, if there's anything else I might be able to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I will try to give them a listen. I got a busy couple of weeks ahead. There's a lot of albums that are dropping. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.